Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the Lewy Body Dementia Doctoral Training Network. Just to let everyone know, we're planning to share this recording of the webinar with networks to try and widen the group of people who will see the webinar and encourage applications to the PhD schemes. So the Lewy Body Dementia Doctoral Training Network is a really exciting opportunity that is going to increase capacity in a really important area of dementia research in dementia with Lewy bodies. And it's also a fantastic opportunity for the students who are going to enter the doctoral training network because they're going to be part of a really vibrant community in an area of research that's advancing really quickly, and they'll have a great level of support that we'll talk about in a little bit. So just to give you an oversight or overview of what we're going to do with the webinar today, on the next slide, we'll give some brief introductions of the speakers. Following that, Professor John Paul Taylor will introduce the Doctoral Training Network and what it is. We're aware that not everyone in the webinar, everyone who sees the webinar, will be familiar with Lewy body dementia. So two of our speakers, Dr. Jay Amin and Dr. Helen Knight, are going to give an overview of the clinical and pathophysiological aspects of Lewy body dementia. And following that, we'll have a bit of a quick fire presentation of some of the great PhD opportunities that are going to be available through the DTN this year. And after that, there'll be a chance to answer some of your questions. So for the people who are attending the webinar live, please feel free to put your questions into the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So we'll just take a few moments to go through and introduce all the speakers today. We'll start at the top left and I'll just let everyone introduce themselves in turn. So we'll start with you, John Paul.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. So my name's John Paul Taylor. I'm an old age psychiatrist who's had a long-standing interest in Lewy body dementia, and the majority of my research is in this sphere, and I'm very privileged to be leading up this doctoral training network.
I'll pass on to you now, Ramona.
Hi, I'm Ramona Weil. I'm a neurologist at University College London. I work in Parkinson's dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies. I'm deputy for this doctoral training network and very excited to be here to share what we're planning at UCL.
And over to you, Helen Knight.
Hello, my name's Helen Miranda Knight. I'm based at the University of Nottingham. I'm a basic scientist. I'm interested in molecular mechanisms that could be contributing to disease pathology. Thank you.
And now over to you, Jay.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jay Amin. I'm an old age psychiatrist at the University of Southampton with an interest in the role of the immune system in Lewy body dementia.
Thanks, Jay. And I know Professor Helen Dawes is planning to join us later. She's from the University of Exeter and we'll be discussing some of the opportunities there. Just to introduce myself, I'm Paul Donaghy. I'm an old age psychiatrist and also a dementia researcher working at Newcastle University. And like John Paul, my interests are mainly in Lewy body dementia, particularly in prodromal diagnosis and imaging. And I'm the centre co-lead for Newcastle. Helen, sorry to put you on the spot. I know you've just joined, but would you mind just a very quick introduction if that's okay?
Yeah, sorry I'm late. I'm Helen Dawes, Professor of Clinical Rehabilitation at the University of Exeter, and I'm particularly interested in movement and functioning and the interrelationship of the impact of Lewy body dementia on that.
Thanks,
Lovely
Helen.
to meet everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. And over to you, Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Headley and I am the Lewy Body Dementia Doctoral Training Network Manager and I'm based up in Newcastle.
Super. Thanks, everybody. So without any further ado, we'll pass over to John Paul now to give us an introduction to the Doctoral Training Network.
Thank you very much, Paul. So as you give a great introduction to what the Doctoral Training Network is, and I'll dive a wee bit deeper. We have a big challenge with Lewy body dementia. It's the second most commonest cause of late life dementia. Neurodegeneration probably affects over 100,000 people in the UK. Do you want to advance it, Paul? Yeah, perfect. And indeed, we reckon now up to about a quarter of people who die with dementia will have evidence of Lewy body pathology in their brains. Now, people who get Lewy body dementia experience a raft of different problems and symptoms. They clearly get cognitive difficulties and what's called cognitive fluctuations. They can experience marked psychosis, visual hallucinations as an example. And they also get problems with their movements, Parkinsonism, and they also have a tendency towards falling. And many patients also experience marked sleep disturbances. So they really get a wide range of different symptoms. And as a consequence, the rates of mortality are often higher compared to Alzheimer's disease. Next. Yeah, perfect. There's a big problem that we have is a lack of treatments at the moment for Lewy body dementia. And indeed, in the past, there's been a real lack of research into Lewy body dementia and indeed research funding in this area. So this is a really opportune time to be moving into this space to really advance it forward. Next slide. Now, the UK is actually the international leader in Lewy body dementia, so we're very well placed to push forward in this area. And we have been growing as a community, and we have a regular conference, the Lewy Body Conference, which has been grown from an acorn, and it's a small sapling at the moment, but it's going to continue to grow and will be an oak tree in the future. So I think we are at this real inflection point or change point where we're moving beyond just isolated pieces of work within Lewy body dementia to something much bigger. And we're very privileged to bring on the Doctoral Training Network as part of this. So our mission really, it's the core of it, is to improve the lives of people living with Lewy body dementia. And within the Doctoral Training Network, it's about training tomorrow's Lewy body dementia researchers. We want you as PhD students to be the next generation of these expert Lewy body dementia researchers and leaders. We recognize the real strengths in the UK here, and we want to build a community. So we're linking people together. We're, as you probably guessed, we're right across all the different institutes here in the UK. And therefore, we want to be linking between institutes. We don't want to have walls or barriers between us. And it's about bringing students together with supervisors who are based across different institutes. And we think that's going to be a real strength of the Lewy body Doctoral Training Network. We have a big focus on student training, as we'll come on to. And furthermore, we've got a diversity in expertise. As you heard from the introductions, we come from the basic science right through to the clinical and indeed the community elements, and I'll show that in a moment. We also have supervisors at different levels. So we've got some amazing early career researchers who are going to be supervisors who will bring that motivation, enthusiasm, coupled with very experienced supervisors. And as I say, a big emphasis is about building connections between students, connections between students and supervisors, between supervisors across different institutes. So we want to build a community and be inclusive. Next slide. So as mentioned, we really cover the full gamut of things in terms of our research priorities. We're looking at the basic science. We want to understand the underlying cause of Lewy body dementia and Lewy body diseases. We want to look at biomarkers, those markers of the pathology and how they change with the disease, which can then feed into better screening and diagnostics for the condition, because often it's quite hard to diagnose Lewy body dementia, especially in the early stages. And then clinically, we want to be looking at our cohorts longitudinally and conducting clinical trials of new agents. We also recognize we need to improve our clinical pathways better and what's called transition points. So how do we stop someone, for example, going into a care home? How do we stop someone falling over with Lewy body dementia? So really we can see we go from the bench to the bedside and into the community. And I think that diversity of different research priorities is going to be a real strength for us. So we mix together basic scientists with also clinicians and individuals who sit within the community space. So how are we going to support and develop our students? Clearly, you're going to get training as part of your project, and that might be specific training, for example, if you're in a lab-based project on different techniques. All of our institutes are world leading in terms of their training programs, and so you will get institute-based training. All of this will be building towards a future for you to develop you as a future research leader. As I keep emphasizing, it's all about the connections. And we are going to be developing a cohort of students across the UK, and you'll be part of that cohort. So you'll have a peer group who you will work with and develop with. We also intend on having a residential meeting, and that will link up with the Alzheimer Society residential events as well. And as I mentioned, there's the Lewy Body UK conference, which is our anchor event, which will be happening every year. Many of you may be familiar with Dementia Researcher. This is another great resource which we're also linking into and help develop that sort of community and connection. Very much we want to support the whole person. Now, there's a lot of great stuff which is going to be institution-based, but we also will be wanting to mentor our students. And one of the key strengths of our proposal, I feel, is that we are also going to have what's called a Lewy Body buddy, a partner, where we will link you with people who have got lived experience of Lewy body dementia, so you can get their perspectives, and they will be with you as you go through your studentship. Next slide. So, people with Lewy body dementia are at the core of what we do. We've got great supervisors and great institutes. We've got an end-to-end translational focus with a real diversity of different projects and expertises. We've got a real heavy emphasis on how we recruit people and train people, and this seminar that Paul's organised is part and parcel of that. And as I keep saying, it's all about bringing people together. So that's all I'm going to say on this point, and I think that's the last slide, isn't it, Paul?
That's it. Thanks so much, John Paul, and a really great overview of what's on offer and what we're trying to do with this DTN. When you're applying for a PhD, it's really good to have some grounding in, you know, what the subject is that your supervisor's planning to study with you. And with that in mind, really, we'll pass over now for a couple of talks just to understand a little bit about Lewy body dementia. And we'll start with Dr. Jay Ammon from the University of Southampton. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks, JP, for the introduction to Lewy body dementia in general as well. I'm going to broaden this out even further for the first part of my few minutes talking to you and just talking about how common dementia is. So the current estimates are that there are around 55 million people living with dementia across the world, with about 1 million of those people living in the UK with dementia. And we believe that that number is only set to rise significantly over the coming decades as our population ages. So I think, I know the Alzheimer's Society are very keen on us emphasising this. I think researching dementia is incredibly important, and I think having a PhD studentship in this area and staying in this field and working through to try and develop new areas of understanding about what's causing dementia and new treatments ultimately is an incredibly important thing to do. Next slide, please. Thinking about the different causes of dementia now. So many of you will know that Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but there are other less common causes of dementia which I think are equally important to research. It's worth just mentioning that the term Lewy body dementia encompasses a couple of different conditions that overlap with each other. So Parkinson's disease dementia, we believe, accounts for about 2% of cases of dementia. And that's where people with Parkinson's disease go on to develop dementia symptoms as part of their disease course. Dementia with Lewy bodies is another term that's used under the umbrella of Lewy body dementia. And we believe that accounts for between 5 to 10% of cases of dementia, but that may actually be an underestimate, and that number may be significantly higher, as it's often hard to diagnose people with dementia with Lewy bodies in clinic. Next slide, please. John Paul briefly mentioned the clinical symptoms of dementia with Lewy bodies, or DLB, at the start of his talk, and I think this is a really important area to emphasize, and I'll come on to why in a moment. But just thinking about these symptoms in a little bit more depth, and these might be things that you want to explore when you're preparing for interviews in particular, in terms of how these symptoms might impact patients. People with DLB often experience a different set of symptoms, especially earlier on in their disease, compared to people with Alzheimer's disease. So whereas people with Alzheimer's disease can experience difficulties with remembering things, which might manifest in them perhaps forgetting recent conversations or misplacing items or repeating themselves, people with DLB can experience a different set of symptoms which bring their own challenges. So firstly, people with DLB can often experience fluctuations in their level of confusion between days, sometimes within the same day and sometimes within the same hour. They can also experience features of Parkinson's disease, so that might be difficulty with walking, falling over more frequently, being more unstable on their feet, perhaps having a tremor. They can experience disturbances during sleep, so they can act out their dreams during sleep, and that might result in them falling out of bed or hitting their bed partner inadvertently. And they can also experience visual hallucinations where they see things that other people can't see, and typically that might be people or animals in the home or nearby the home. So I'm sure you'll all agree that this is quite a troubling set of symptoms. I mean, and it can impact on the prognosis of people with DLB. So they can, people with DLB often end up in hospital more frequently than people with other types of dementia, and the overall prognosis is more challenging. So it is a really important condition to research, and I'm really glad that you're here and watching this webinar and considering applying. Thank you, Paul.
Super. Thanks very much, Jay. You know, a great bit of detail there on what people experience with these disorders. And now just passing over to Dr. Helen Knight from the University of Nottingham to understand a little bit about what might be going on in the brain to cause those problems. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. So LBD pathophysiology is it involves a protein called alpha-synuclein, which takes up a different form or conformation, which causes build-up of small, initially small aggregates of alpha-synuclein and other proteins. And these aggregates become larger till they get to a stage we call them Lewy bodies. As you can see on the right, these Lewy bodies at an early stage are located within neurons and at sites between neurons that we call synapses. Next slide, please. At a slightly later stage, and if you look down at a microscope at a tissue section that's been stained for Lewy bodies, you can see by the brown staining here that these Lewy bodies actually can cover quite a large area, which would include multiple cells. Next slide, please. So why do these aggregates form? What are the molecular processes which contribute? Well, there have been a number of theories over the years and evidence to back up these theories. It could be abnormalities in proteins being broken down, so protein degradation pathways. It could be that protein production is disrupted, so protein synthesis is not going on in the right place at the right time. A more recent idea, and one that I particularly favour, is the idea that a process called liquid phase transition is disrupted. So liquid phase transition occurs throughout cells, usually in very small regions that we call nanodomains. And it involves proteins and RNAs going from a more distributed state to initiating to form little droplets. And these droplets involve proteins that are a little bit more flexible in shape, like alpha-synuclein. And we know if we initiate this, we can see that alpha-synuclein over time will naturally form these droplets. Next slide, please. So what initiates these molecular processes to go wrong? Well, we definitely know that environmental factors such as lifestyle, diet, stress are contributors, as they also contribute to other forms of dementia. We also know that genetics play a role. We know that in mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of cells, produce the energy that cells need to undertake metabolism. We know that's going wrong at some stage. We know that something's going wrong in mitochondria, but there may be other molecular factors which act as switches that can switch on or off processes, such as epigenetic processes. And these include modification to proteins, such as phosphorylation occurring on proteins, or indeed modification to RNAs, which is something that my lab is particularly keen on, and I'll be mentioning that a bit later when I come to talk about projects at Nottingham. Next slide, please. Another important thing that's going on at the moment for LBD is the we're attempting to identify reliable and consistent biomarkers, whether they're brain imaging or molecular biomarkers. And this is important because we can use such biomarkers to say, this patient needs this treatment now, or this patient is responding well to a particular treatment. And again, I'll bring that up when we talk about projects here in Nottingham. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Helen, and a perfect segue into the next section where we'll be discussing those projects. And I think that overview of the sort of clinical aspects and all of the pathophysiological, genetic and environmental factors, we're really trying to capture that in the DTN in that spectrum that John Paul talked about of projects and work that we want to undertake. So we're going to have some brief introductions to some of these exciting projects that are going to be available later this year. And encourage everyone to go to the web page that's on the bottom of this slide. The projects, as they become available for applications, will go on to this website from Alzheimer's Society. And you'll be able to see a little bit more detail about the projects and how you apply to take them. So I'll pass over first to Ramona to talk about the projects at UCL. Thanks, Ramona.
Thank you. Well, thanks for joining, and it's brilliant to have everyone together here talking from the different leads and the different sites. So it was a great introduction, and what was really helpful was to have kind of really laid out the different clinical elements that you can see within Lewy body dementia. And then also thanks from Helen and Miranda for giving us the science that underpins that. So at UCL, we're trying to bring some of that together in this project. And the work that we do in my lab at UCL is very much around clinical populations, but we've tried to bring into that some of the underlying brain changes that happen in people who have Lewy body dementia. So we have already running in our group cohorts of people living with Lewy body dementia who have come along to the lab and have taken part in large observational studies. I say large, 50 to 100 people. And as part of that, whenever they come for a visit, they will have we'll go through their very detailed information about their clinical features of Lewy body dementia, and they'll also have a brain scan, and we have access to very advanced different types of MRI brain scans. And we also take samples from their blood and also optional samples from as a lumbar puncture, so we can get some spinal fluid. And all of this gives us a lot of information about individual patients. So the project that we're proposing for this doctoral training program is that what we'd like you to do is bring together all the different clinical plasma, lumbar puncture, cerebrospinal, and also the different imaging elements in a computational model of what's happening in people who have Lewy body dementia. And we're doing this with two collaborators. One is a computational, a computer scientist called Neil Oxtoby, who is based at UCL. And then this is also the second supervisor for this project is Professor John Paul Taylor at Newcastle, who also has large observational cohorts information from people with Lewy body dementia. And by doing this modelling, what we're aiming to do is identify two things. One of them is to look at the order of events. What happens first, or what happens what's the sequence of events that happens in people who have Lewy body dementia, which we can uncover using the types of computational modelling that we're doing. And also, if we have enough patients in our cohorts, which we hope to do by the end of this year, is potentially to look at different subtypes of Lewy body dementia. So I think the key message to say is that what we're looking for, if you're interested in this project, this is very much going to be a project where there could be some patient-facing elements and also computational. So we're looking for people who are interested in doing MRI analysis and computation. If you want to do more kind of wet lab work, that this is probably not the project for you. But if you want to do computational work and potentially have some patient-facing elements where you're working with patients and maybe potentially we'll be doing some neuropsychological assessments, for example, then this could be a really great project for you. So you'll get skills in patient-facing elements and in computational analysis of imaging data.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Ramona. And just to say to all the people attending live at the webinar, feel free to ask any questions in the chat and we'll address those at the end. I'll now pass across to Jay to talk about the opportunities at the University of Southampton.
Thank you, Paul. So I'll start off by just giving a very brief overview about the strengths of research at the University of Southampton. So we're world leading in terms of developing insights into the role of inflammation and the activation of the immune system in Alzheimer's disease. And I think we now know that people with Alzheimer's disease, that's the most common cause of dementia, are at increased risk of getting that disease if they have chronic conditions through their life that activate the immune system. And we know that people who already have Alzheimer's disease will progress faster in their disease if they pick up infections or have surgery or anything that activates the immune system. So we're offering a couple of projects that start this year that are related to that interaction between Lewy body dementia in particular here and the role of the immune system. So the first project is a clinical research fellowship. So this is for only for medical doctors who are either in old age psychiatry training, neurology training, or histopathology/neuropathology training. And this is going to be a project looking at post-mortem human brain tissue and examining the link between the presence of neuropathology that Helen outlined earlier and neuroinflammation, so parts of the adaptive and innate immune system in the brain. That's going to be supervised by me as the lead supervisor, along with Delphine Bosch, Southampton, and Lauren Walker and Paul Donaghy as well, who's here from the Newcastle University. The second project that's available is led by Professor Jessica Teeling, who is a basic science researcher here at the University of Southampton. And her project is going to be looking at developing a mouse experimental model of dementia with Lewy bodies, which she's hoping will have varying degrees of Alzheimer's co-pathology. And the idea here is to look at the interaction again between pathology and inflammation, but particularly look at testing some of the newer therapeutic pathways that are being developed in Alzheimer's disease and seeing whether they can be translated into effective treatments for dementia with Lewy bodies. So for that project, that's open to anyone. You don't have to be a medical doctor for that. You will probably need to be interested in or open to working with animal models for that project, and being able to work in a wet lab and having those associated skills would be important to show that either you have those skills already or you're willing to be trained up. And obviously a comprehensive training package will be provided by Professor Teeling and her team. Thank you.
Super. Thanks very much for that, Jay. We'll now pass across to Helen Knight to talk about the Nottingham projects. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you. So the first project will come under me, Dr. Helen Miranda Knight, in collaboration with Dr. Daniel Erskine at the University of Newcastle, he hasn't just moved, and Professor Dag Arsland, who's based at King's College London. This project, entitled Mitochondrial RNA Metabolism in Lewy Body Dementia, will focus on mitochondria and whether RNA in mitochondria, whether that's messenger RNA or other forms such as tRNAs shown on the right, whether they are changed in their modification status in LBD. This is a very interesting collaboration because I'm very much wet lab and RNA modifications. Dr. Erskine has huge expertise in mitochondria, and Professor Arsland has huge expertise in clinical aspects and other research into LBD. Could you advance it, please? So this project is very much wet lab. It will involve RNA short read sequencing and computational analysis and other types of data analysis. It will involve cell culture and new technology using cell cultures, and we will also be looking at neuropathological load in brain sections using advanced microscopy. Don't worry, you will be taught all of this. You're not expected to come here with all these skills. A 4-year or 3-year wet lab and 1-year Bright Up program enables you to learn these skills and develop both your academic but clinical understanding of diseases. So this is aimed at a domestic UK PhD student, so you don't have to have a medical background at all. Next slide, please. So the second project for Nottingham University is entitled Discovering Blood-Based Biomarkers for Improving Clinical Diagnosis of Dementia with Lewy Bodies. It will be supervised by Dr. Rajamani here at the University of Nottingham and Dr. Killick based at King's College London. The project will focus on small extracellular vesicles in plasma taken from blood. It will be looking at changes in RNA expression and protein abundance in these samples and comparing between LBD, Alzheimer's disease, and healthy controls. There will also be an aspect to develop computational techniques because the aim is to use artificial intelligence-based algorithms to identify the best combination of these biomarkers. And similar to the first project, it will be aimed at a home UK PhD student and no medical knowledge is needed, or indeed wet lab at this stage is needed. Thank you.
Super, thanks Helen, and we'll now pass over to Helen Dawes from Exeter. Thanks Helen.
Okay, thank you very much. Did you manage to get the slides uploaded or not?
Apologies, I couldn't access the slides yet.
I've got a couple of slides here, if I'm allowed to share. If not, don't worry. Are you happy with that or not?
If you can share them now, yeah, if you want to try sharing them, you can, yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, that's there.
Okay, so this is a project looking at technology in the context of Lewy body dementia. So the supervisors are Professor Chris Fox, who's a psychiatrist, myself, I'm a movement scientist, physiotherapist, and Dr. Rachel Lawson, who's a chartered psychologist. So it's a nice team here, and across 2 universities, Newcastle and the University of Exeter, and you'll be based in Exeter. Okay, so really just focusing in onto the symptoms, we're really interested in how these are impacting on the presentation and clinical presentation. And there's different areas that are affected, such as movement issues that have been described, fluctuating cognitive symptoms, sleep, mood and behavior, and also the impact on dysautonomia. So when people stand up, they often drop blood pressure and other impacts of that. So we're looking at how technology can better support mobility and functioning in people living with Lewy body dementia. And as we know, there's masses of technologies out there at the moment. There's a whole kind of stream of them. And what we're going to do is kind of think about them in 4 areas, really. There's the sort of assistive devices, such as your wearables or your exoskeletons or even wheelchairs and scooters. There's cognitive support and communication training apps, home automation systems that enable you to kind of live in your home or in a wider context, life space, such as out in the community. And then there's also the social connection and engagement piece. So at the moment, we're not saying that you have to focus in on a particular area, but that will come through the PhD. So when we think about movement, we think about and getting around, it's moving in the context of the whole environment. And so it taps into the areas of psychology, psychiatry, and the movement disorder itself. So and moving as well, this will be a picture that you can recognize, that it becomes more effort for people with Lewy body dementia to move and to concentrate, and also that they see the world in a different way. So we're hoping to really impact on this, and impact on some of the issues then. So there's the problem that the individual faces, but then there's also the issues around the technology. And and getting technology that works. And we all know about that. Can people use it? Is it person-centered? Is it private? So these are some of the labs that we've got. So and this is the sort of space where you might be able to carry out some of your experiments. So we're looking for somebody who's confident with data, but is also perhaps interested in working with people with Lewy body dementia to explore some of the technologies that we might use. So what we've asked for in the PhD is an initial review, step one, to pull things together, a realist review, then working with people with dementia, with Lewy body dementia to explore that, and then looking at a certain technology and producing that together, and then evaluating that in a proof of concept study. So that's what we're proposing to do together. And thank you. And I will stop sharing my screen. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Helen. I'll just try and get the original slides up again now.
Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the projects that are available here in Newcastle. And we've got 4 projects for this first year of the DTC, and part of that is that we also, as well as this projects that are funded by the Alzheimer Society from the core Dementia Doctoral Training Network. We've also got a project funded locally by Newcastle University, which has come into the network, and also a project funded by the Lewy Body Society, which is the UK charity that focuses on Lewy body dementia. So I'll run through each of these in turn. For the first project, delirium is a major problem for people with Lewy body dementia. So delirium is an acute confusional state, often caused by a medical problem like an infection or something similar. People with Lewy body dementia are at much higher risk, even than other people with different types of dementia, for getting delirium, and it can cause declines in the person's physical health and cognition following the delirium. So this project seeks to use EEG, so recordings of the brain electrical activity, for people who have been admitted to hospital with delirium who have Lewy body dementia. And it will try to understand whether there's something we can see in the EEG that helps to identify delirium, but also helps to predict those people whose cognition might decline over time. And the long-term goal is that we will be able to do something to intervene to try and stop that decline that can be associated with delirium. The second and third projects are interested in diagnosis in dementia with Lewy bodies. So we know from previous research that people who have Lewy body dementia, their diagnosis is delayed, so they take longer to get a diagnosis. And actually lots of people with Lewy body dementia never receive a diagnosis. So projects 2 and 3 tackle this from 2 very different angles. Project 2 is interested in diagnostic delays, and particularly interested in the primary care pathway that people have. So the contact and care people have at their GPs and local services before they're referred to specialists. And this will use 2 different types of methods. So it'll use quantitative methods using a very, very large and national database of GP records. And it will also use qualitative methods to discuss with clinicians about what affects the pathway of patients prior to referral to a specialist. And the long-term goal of that project really is to try to develop guidelines for primary care clinicians to help improve that early pathway in Lewy body dementia diagnosis. Project 3 tackles underdiagnosis from a different direction, so it's specifically interested in these people who never receive a diagnosis, and it'll use a large clinical pathological cohort. So that's a cohort of people who during life had multiple clinical assessments to understand what symptoms they were experiencing, and then after their death they donated their brains to research, and so we know what symptoms they had, and we can see exactly what pathology they had in their brain. And so this project will look at people who have Lewy body dementia as defined by the proteins that are in their brain, but didn't receive a diagnosis during life. And we'll try to understand what their clinical symptoms were and whether we could pick this up during life, but also whether there's something different about the disease and about the pathology that the person has in their brain for those people who don't receive a diagnosis. And finally, the final project, Project 4, is interested in what is driving the death of nerve cells, neurodegeneration in Lewy body dementia. Like a lot of the projects, or all of the projects in the DTN, it's a collaborative project, principally between Newcastle and UCL. And it will use some of the data that Ramona was talking about from these advanced imaging techniques in Lewy body dementia but also with that, look at what is going on in the tissue pathophysiology from post-mortem brain tissue, and try to couple those two things together to understand how disease pathologies and how things like iron deposition might be affecting neurodegeneration in Lewy body dementia. So that's a flavour of the projects we have in Newcastle. As with all the other projects, I would just really encourage you to go to the Alzheimer's Society website. There you'll find links to the applications for each project. You'll also be able to see in a bit more detail what each of those projects is about. I can see that you've all been very shy and haven't wanted to ask any questions in the chat, which is absolutely fine. I'll maybe just finish off with a few comments, just to give a few tips for your applications. So I guess when any of us are receiving any of these application forms, we really want to see that you're enthusiastic. So we really want to know, why are you applying for this project? What is it about this project that you're really interested in? And then coupled with that, what are the skills that you have that you'll bring to it? So you're not expected to start the PhD as an expert. The PhD is about developing expertise, but what can you bring that will allow you to develop the skills through the PhD project and allow you to make the most of the training that you have? When you're applying for a PhD, your supervisor will want to know that you're interested in their subject, and you'll be expected to have had a look to see what your supervisor does, what other bits of research are they interested in, what facilities do they have, and sort of show why you're interested in working in with this specific person in this specific institution. And finally, we're really proud of the Doctoral Training Network. It's a big amount of funding that's going to make a huge difference to people with Lewy body dementia, and just showing that you're aware not just of the project and the thing that you're going to be focused on, but also the community that you're joining. So you're joining the Doctoral Training Network community and just showing a bit of an understanding about what that is. And again, that's where you can sort of show your enthusiasm about why you specifically want to be part of the Doctoral Training Network. So I would just open it up if any of the other supervisors want to mention anything. And Becky, I can see you're typing. Is there anything you'd like to just mention to anyone as the coordinator for the network?
I'm basically just putting a message in, Paul, to give the Lewy body dementia email. So if anybody thinks of a follow-up question and they don't particularly want to contact individuals at universities, feel free to contact me, and I can either gather that information for you, or I can pass your query on.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Becky. Do any of the other speakers want to add anything before we close the webinar? Okay, just to say thanks very much for everyone who's joined live. Thanks to those who have watched the recording. And as Becky says, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks again for listening, and we really look forward to receiving your applications. Take care.